The house was loud with laughter, and that's how I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the sound itself. It was where it was coming from. Down the hall, behind a door that used to belong to my son when he still lived at home. The one we'd kept for guests. The door was half closed, light spilling into the hallway in a thin, deliberate line. I paused with a glass of water in my hand and felt a pressure behind my eyes that had nothing to do with fatigue. I didn't open the door. I didn't need to, because I recognized the laugh, my wife's, and layered beneath it, lower, careful, not quite confident, was the voice of my son's best friend. We'd known him for years, since he was a teenager sleeping on our couch after late practices, since he'd called my wife ma'am and me sir, and ate seconds like he hadn't seen food in days. He'd grown up around us, grown into our routines, until he was as familiar as a piece of furniture you stop noticing because it never moves. Until it does. I stood there longer than I should have, letting the sound stitch together, meaning I wasn't ready to accept. My wife laughed again, soft, private, and the boy, the man, I corrected myself, because words matter, said something I couldn't hear. Then there was a pause. The kind of pause that implies closeness without needing proof. I set the glass down on the counter and walked outside. The night air felt sharp, honest. The porch light hummed as if it had something to say. I leaned against the railing and tried to slow my breathing, tried to find an explanation that didn't dismantle the last 20 years of my life. It was just conversation, I told myself. Just familiarity. Just me reading into things because that's what happens when you're tired. But the house had changed its tone, and I knew, deep down, that you don't unhear a sound like that. Earlier that evening had been normal. That's the part that makes it cruel. Dinner on the table. My son dropping by after work with his friend because it was easier than cooking. My wife moving through the kitchen with ease, touching shoulders, refilling glasses, asking about schedules. The friend, him, had stayed behind when my son left to meet someone else. Said he needed to finish a call, maybe crash in the guest room. I didn't object. Why would I? He'd done that 100 times before. When my son left, my wife suggested we watch something together. I told her I had a few emails to finish. She nodded, said she'd help our guest get settled, and disappeared down the hall. Time passed. I finished my emails. The house grew quieter. Too quiet. I noticed the door down the hall still closed, the lights still on. I noticed how easy it was to remember moments I'd dismissed. The way she'd defended him in small arguments. The way she'd checked if he'd eaten. The way he'd started arriving earlier and leaving later. I told myself those were parental instincts. I told myself a lot of things. When I went to get water, I heard the laugh. And now I was outside, counting breaths, trying to understand how something could feel so wrong without any single act to point to. I stayed there until the porch light clicked off behind me and the night pressed in closer, forcing a decision I didn't want to make. I went back inside. The hallway was quiet now. The door closed fully. I stood there, hand hovering near the frame, and felt a strange relief that I'd missed whatever had happened, that I could still live in not knowing a little longer. I turned away. In bed that night, my wife slid in beside me, warm, familiar. She kissed my shoulder like she always did, asked if I was coming to sleep earlier tomorrow. I said yes. I lied easily. She fell asleep quickly. I didn't. I stared at the ceiling and replayed the laugh until it stopped sounding like a coincidence and started sounding like a signal I'd ignored for too long. The next morning, the guest room door was open. The bed was made. He was gone. My wife was already dressed, coffee in hand, scrolling through her phone. She looked up and smiled. "Morning," she said, like nothing had happened, like nothing had changed. "Did he leave early?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Yeah, didn't want to wake us." There it was, the ease of it, the practiced normalcy. I nodded and poured myself coffee I didn't want. I watched her move through the kitchen and wondered when the line had shifted from hospitality to something else, from care to concealment. I wondered how long it takes for familiarity to become permission. And I wondered, quietly, carefully, how a betrayal could live inside your home without ever announcing itself. Because if there was one thing I understood now, it was this. I hadn't caught anyone doing anything. I'd caught the aftermath, and whatever had happened behind that door hadn't been an accident. Once a doubt takes root, it doesn't stay still. It spreads quietly, disguising itself as curiosity, as concern, as the reasonable need to understand your own life. I went to work that morning and found myself rereading the same email 3 times, my mind circling the sound of that laugh like it was a clue I'd dropped and couldn't retrieve. I told myself I was overreacting. People laugh, guests linger, homes carry echoes that don't mean anything. I repeated those sentences like a prayer, but they didn't land the way they used to. They slid off something harder that had formed overnight. When I came home that afternoon, my wife was in the kitchen again, phone propped against the coffee maker, smiling down at the screen. She didn't look up when I walked in, just said my name the way she always did, casual and warm. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my tone light. She turned the phone face down without thinking. "Oh, just something funny." That was new, not the lie itself, the reflex. I nodded and kissed her cheek. She smelled like the soap she only used when she had time. I made a mental note of that and hated myself for it. That evening, my son texted to say he might stop by again later in the week with his friend. My wife read the message over my shoulder. "That's nice," she said quickly. "He's always welcome." Her enthusiasm was just half a shade too bright. The next few days rearranged themselves around small absences. My wife ran errands she didn't need to run, took longer routes home, offered to pick things up for my son when he didn't ask. When his friend did come by, she hovered in ways that didn't look like concern anymore. It looked like anticipation. I started watching the clock. I learned that he showed up when I was least likely to be home. Late afternoons, early evenings. He never stayed overnight again, but he stayed long enough that the door closed and the house settled into a different rhythm. One afternoon, I came home early without warning. I parked down the street, not out of strategy, just habit, and walked the rest of the way. The front of the house looked normal, too normal. Curtains drawn the way they always were. No noise, no obvious sign of anything out of place. Inside, the air felt warmer than it should have. I heard voices in the living room, hers and his, low, close, not hushed but intimate in the way people speak when they believe they are alone. I stayed in the hallway, heart pounding, my mind scrambling for a reason to announce myself that didn't feel like surrender. Then she said his name, not sharply, not casually, softly, like you say someone's name when you want their attention without inviting the room into it. I stepped forward then, not dramatically, just enough. They separated instantly, too quickly to be innocent. He stood, hands in his pockets, posture stiff. She straightened a pillow that hadn't moved. "Oh," she said, startled but composed. "You're home early." "Meeting ended," I replied. Her smile came a beat late. You remember? I know who he is, I said gently. He laughed nervously and said something about heading out. She insisted he stay for dinner. I declined on his behalf before he could answer. When he left, she didn't watch him go. That bothered me more than if she had. That night, she was attentive. Too attentive. Asked about my day, sat close on the couch, rested her head on my shoulder like muscle memory could overwrite suspicion. I let her. I needed to know if this version of closeness was still real or just a counterweight. In bed, she fell asleep quickly again. I lay awake, replaying the way they'd separated, the precision of it, the speed. You don't move like that unless you've rehearsed. The next day, I found myself doing something I'd never done before. I checked our shared calendar. Her entries had multiplied. Coffee dates marked vaguely, appointments without detail. Out for a bit. Back late. None of them included my son's name. None of them needed to. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Something in me understood that once I asked the question directly, the story would harden around the answer she chose. I wanted to see how far this went on its own. The breaking point came quietly. I was in the garage, reorganizing shelves that didn't need reorganizing, when her phone buzzed on the workbench. I wasn't near it. I wasn't touching it. But the screen lit up long enough for a preview to flash. A message. From him. No hearts. No words I could quote later. Just familiarity. A joke only two people would share. She grabbed the phone quickly when she came in, eyes flicking to my face, searching. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yes," I said, and meant something different than she heard. That night, my son came by alone. He talked about work, about plans, about how his friend had been busy lately. He said it casually, but I caught the hesitation, the way he didn't quite meet my eyes. "Busy with what?" I asked. He shrugged. "I don't know. Stuff." Stuff had become the most dangerous word in my house. After he left, I stood at the sink washing dishes that were already clean. My wife dried them beside me, our shoulders brushing. I felt a strange grief, not for the marriage yet, but for the version of myself who used to trust this closeness without question. I realized then that whatever was happening wasn't fueled by impulse. It was sustained by access, by history, by the safety of familiarity, and by the assumption that I would keep choosing silence over disruption. I went to bed with a decision forming, not about confrontation, but about clarity. I wasn't going to catch them in the act. I didn't need spectacle. I needed certainty. Because the hardest truth was already clear. This wasn't a stranger. This was someone who'd eaten at my table, laughed with my son, and learned exactly how our family worked. Well enough to slip into the gaps without making a sound. I didn't plan to find proof that day. I planned to leave the house early, grab coffee, clear my head, and return pretending I hadn't already crossed a line inside myself. That's the lie I told myself as I picked up my keys and heard her voice from the kitchen asking where I was going. "Quick errand," I said. She nodded without looking up, already elsewhere. Halfway down the street, my phone buzzed. A message from my son, short, casual. "Hey, are you home?" I stared at it longer than necessary. "Just stepped out," I replied. "Why?" A pause. Then, "Never mind. I'll catch you later." I turned the car around. When I pulled into the driveway, his car wasn't there. That should have reassured me. Instead, it sharpened something. I walked in quietly, keys still in my hand, shoes barely touching the floor. The house was too still. No television, no music. just the low hum of the refrigerator and something else. Movement, maybe, or the absence of it. I moved toward the hallway and stopped when I heard voices again. Not laughter this time. Conversation, low, intimate. The kind of tone people use when they're past joking and into something that matters. I stood at the corner where the hall opened into the living room and watched without announcing myself. They were sitting on opposite ends of the couch, too far apart to look guilty, too close to look accidental. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, hands clasped. She sat angled toward him, one leg tucked beneath her, posture open in a way she hadn't been with me in months. The space between them felt curated, enough to maintain deniability, not enough to deny intent. "I don't want to hurt him," she was saying. He nodded. "I know." That was it. The line that took the air out of the room. Not "this is wrong." Not "we should stop." Just "I know." I stepped into view then. Neither of them jumped. That told me more than any reaction could have. He looked up first, eyes widening just a fraction. She turned slowly, as if she already knew. "Oh," she said. "You're back." "Yes," I replied. "I am." Silence filled the space between us. Thick, expectant. I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't expected. Not arrogance, not defiance, fear. He stood quickly, stumbling over words about leaving, about not meaning to intrude, about calling my son later. I raised a hand, not aggressively, just enough. "Sit," I said. He hesitated, then did. My wife's face had gone pale. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, realizing explanations were suddenly unnecessary. "How long?" I asked. They both spoke at once. She stopped him with a look. "A few months," she said quietly. The room tilted, not violently, but enough that I had to sit down myself. I chose the chair across from them, keeping my voice steady because it mattered. "And my son?" I asked. Her eyes filled. "He doesn't know." He shook his head quickly. "I would never." "I didn't ask," I said. The weight of that silence landed differently on each of us. I could feel it settling, choosing where to press. "Did you plan it around me?" I asked her. She closed her eyes. "Yes." There it was again. The word that kept repeating itself in my life like a drumbeat. "Yes." I turned to him. "And you?" He swallowed. I told myself it was temporary. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was honest in the most cowardly way. Temporary is what people call something they don't want to take responsibility for. I stood up slowly. My legs felt steady. My heart did not. "Get your things," I said to him. "Leave." He didn't argue. He didn't look at her. He gathered his jacket, his phone, his dignity, what little was left of it, and walked past me without meeting my eyes. When the door closed, the house felt suddenly enormous. My wife began to cry then, not loudly, not theatrically, just the quiet kind that shakes your shoulders and leaves you exposed. I watched her with a strange detachment, noticing how grief looks different when it's mixed with relief. "I never meant for this to happen," she said. "I believe you," I replied, and that surprised us both. She looked up sharply. "You do?" "Yes," I said. "I believe you didn't mean for it to become visible." She flinched. I sat back down and folded my hands, feeling something settle inside me. Not peace, but certainty, the kind that doesn't need to be dramatic. "This ends," I said. "Today." She nodded frantically. "Yes, of course." "I'm not asking," I continued. "I'm telling you what happens next. We tell our son together. Not everything, but enough. We don't lie to protect ourselves. And after that, we separate." Her head snapped up. Please. No, I said gently. I won't live in a house where loyalty is optional. She reached for my hand. I let her touch it for a second, just long enough to feel how familiar it still was, and how wrong. Then I stood. That night, I slept in the guest room, the room where this had started. I lay awake listening to the house settle, to the echoes of a life rearranging itself, and understood something with painful clarity. The betrayal wasn't just that she chose someone else. It was that she chose someone who would fracture our family in a way that couldn't be repaired quietly. And tomorrow, the silence would end, for all of us. Telling our son was harder than catching them. That surprised me. I'd spent days bracing for confrontation, for raised voices and shattered objects, and the kind of anger that demands witnesses. What I wasn't prepared for was the quiet weight of sitting across from my child and choosing which truths would follow him for the rest of his life. We asked him to come over the next evening. Just him. No explanations over the phone. My wife insisted on cooking dinner like it was any other visit, as if muscle memory could soften what was coming. I let her. Normalcy, I was learning, is a powerful anesthetic. He arrived with that same easy familiarity he'd always had in this house, kicking off his shoes, opening the fridge without asking. He joked about traffic, about work, about how his friend had been hard to reach lately. My wife flinched at that. He didn't notice. We sat at the table after dinner, plates pushed aside. I felt my pulse in my ears. My wife folded her hands together, then unfolded them, then folded them again. "There's something we need to tell you," I said. He looked between us, smile fading. "Okay." I took a breath. "Your friend crossed a line with your mother." Silence. Not confusion, not denial, just silence, heavy and immediate. He stared at me, then at her. "What kind of line?" She spoke then, voice shaking. "An inappropriate one. It shouldn't have happened." His jaw tightened. "Did it?" "Yes," I said, before she could soften it. "It did." The look on his face was something I will carry forever. Not just hurt, disorientation. Like the map he'd been using to navigate his life had been flipped upside down without warning. "How long?" he asked quietly. I answered before my wife could. "Long enough." He stood up abruptly, chair scraping back. "So you both just let this exist?" "No," I said. "I didn't know. Until recently." That mattered to him. I could see it in the way his shoulders lowered just slightly. He turned to her. "You let me bring him here." She covered her mouth with her hand, tears spilling now. "I didn't think—" "That's the problem," he said, voice breaking. "You didn't." He left without yelling, without slamming doors. He just walked out, keys shaking in his hand, and drove away into a night that would never feel the same to him again. After that, everything accelerated. My wife moved into her sister's place within the week. Not because I forced her out, but because staying had become unbearable. Every object in the house had started to feel like an accusation. Every room carried an echo. I packed my things slowly, not in anger, with care, like I was disassembling a life that had already stopped functioning. The friend tried to contact me once. A text, long, apologetic, full of words like mistake and confusion and never meant to hurt anyone. I didn't respond. I blocked the number and felt something close to relief. My son stopped speaking to him entirely. That was his choice. I didn't encourage it. I didn't need to. Some consequences don't require explanation. The days that followed were strange in their calm. No shouting, no public fallout. Just the quiet reorganization of a family that had been split not by a single act, but by a series of decisions made in private. One night, as I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by boxes, my wife came by to pick up the last of her things. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers sharing a narrow hallway. "I never thought I'd be this person," she said softly. "I know," I replied. She looked at me then, really looked. "Do you hate me?" I considered the question longer than she probably expected. "No," I said, "but I don't recognize us anymore." She nodded, tears sliding silently down her face. When she left, the house felt emptier but cleaner, like something toxic had finally aired out. I slept better than I had in months. Not because I was happy, because the waiting was over. The storm everyone fears had already passed. Quietly, without spectacle. And all that remained was the aftermath. The part where you decide what kind of man you're going to be once the truth is no longer a secret. Everyone expects the ending to be loud. That's what people prepare you for when a marriage collapses. Raised voices, slammed doors, a clean villain everyone can point at so the story makes sense. Friends hinted I should be angrier. Family waited for me to take a stand, as if volume was proof of strength. But after the truth came out, nothing got louder. It got quieter. The days that followed moved forward with an almost insulting normalcy. The trash still went out on Tuesday. The kids still needed lunches packed. The sun still came through the kitchen window at the same angle every morning. Life didn't pause to acknowledge that something fundamental had broken. My wife moved out within the week, not in a dramatic way. No arguments over furniture, no accusations shouted across rooms. She packed carefully, like someone handling fragile items she no longer owned. She cried in private moments, once in the driveway, once in the kitchen, when she forgot why she'd walked into the room, but never in a way that demanded comfort. The kids were told what they needed to hear, and nothing more. That we loved them, that this wasn't their fault, that sometimes adults fail at being honest with each other. They accepted it the way children accept weather, confused, sad, then distracted by the next immediate need. The person I couldn't reach was my son. After he walked out that night, something in him rearranged itself. He didn't cut me off, but he didn't lean in either. Our conversations became practical. Texts about insurance, paperwork, logistics, necessary things that let him stay connected without touching the wound. I didn't push. I'd already learned what pressure does to people when they're cornered. It makes them choose silence over truth. I wasn't going to repeat that mistake. Weeks passed, then months. I built a new routine around absence. I moved into the guest room, not as punishment, but as a boundary. I boxed up photos I wasn't ready to look at. I replaced small things my wife had always adjusted, not because they mattered, but because seeing them made me feel like I was living inside someone else's choices. Then one Tuesday night, my son showed up unannounced. He stood on the porch longer than necessary, like he wasn't sure he belonged there anymore. His face looked tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. "I can't keep carrying this," he said as soon as I opened the door. I stepped aside and let him in without asking questions. We sat at the kitchen table again. I poured water. He didn't touch it. His hands stayed clasped, like he was bracing for impact. "He talked to me," my son said. I knew who he meant before he said anything else. "He showed up at my place last week," my son continued. "He looked wrecked, said he hadn't slept, said he needed to tell me the truth, even if I never spoke to him again." I stayed quiet. People only tell the truth when they feel like the ground under them isn't moving. He didn't blame you, my son said. He didn't blame me. He blamed himself. Said it started as a tension, that he told himself it was temporary, that he kept thinking he could stop. My son swallowed hard. Then he said something I wasn't ready for. I felt my chest tighten. What? He said he tried to end it, my son said. More than once. He blocked her. He avoided the house. And she kept pulling him back. The room went still. My son rubbed his face slowly. New numbers, emails. Just talk to me. Don't leave me like this. He said he didn't know how to say no without blowing everything up. And suddenly, all those little details I'd noticed early on, her laughter behind the guest room door, the reflexive way she flipped her phone, the calendar entries that didn't name anything, weren't just signs of secrecy. They were signs of control. My wife hadn't just fallen into an affair. She had maintained it, managed it, rescued it when it threatened to collapse. My son slid his phone across the table. He sent me messages. I didn't bring them for proof. I didn't know what to do with this anymore. I didn't read them. I didn't need to. What do you want now? I asked him. He shook his head. I don't know. I just know I don't want this to define me, and I don't want to lose you too. That was the moment that took my breath away. Not rage, not revenge, reconnection. I leaned forward. Listen to me. This was never yours to carry. He looked at me, eyes wet, like he'd been waiting for permission to put something down. You didn't create this. You didn't authorize it. You don't owe loyalty like it's a punishment. He nodded slowly, shoulders shaking. I feel stupid. You trusted people who shouldn't have asked for your trust, I said. That doesn't make you stupid. It makes you human. When he finally exhaled, it sounded like something leaving his body for good. That night, I made a decision I hadn't planned on. Not about revenge, not about reconciliation, about truth. 2 days later, my wife came by to drop off a box of the kids' things. She looked thinner, tired. The careful polish she used to wear like armor was gone. I didn't ease into it. Our son knows, I said. The box slipped slightly in her hands. She steadied it quickly. Knows what? Enough, I said. Her face drained of color. Why would you tell him? I didn't, I replied. He learned on his own, the way people do when lies live too close to their lives. Her breathing turned shallow. For the first time since everything unraveled, she looked afraid, not of losing me, but of facing the person she'd hurt most. He hates me, she whispered. I don't know what he feels, I said, but I know what I'm not doing anymore. She looked up. What? I'm not carrying your shame so you can feel lighter, I said. I'm not managing the fallout for you, and I'm not protecting a version of the story that only works if everyone else stays confused. Tears spilled over. I didn't mean... I know, I said quietly. You didn't mean for it to become visible. That was when she asked the question I didn't expect. Will you be there? She said, voice breaking. When I talk to him? I stared at her, struck by how small the request was. Not forgiveness, not repair, just fear. No, I said. Her face fell. But I'll be there after, I added. For him. She nodded, wiped her face, and carried the box down the hall like it weighed twice as much now. That evening, my son called. She wants to talk, he said. What do you want to do? I asked. A long pause. Then, I want her to say it without hiding. Then do that, I said. And call me when you're done. He came by the next night, later than usual. I didn't ask for details. Some conversations belong only to the people inside them. But he told me one thing. She didn't deny it, he said. She didn't blame him. She didn't blame you. She said she used people to feel wanted. He looked up at me, eyes clearer than they'd been in months. I told her I'm not ready to forgive, but I'm not letting this ruin my life. That was the ending I never saw coming. Not punishment, not absolution, a boundary. Time passed. The family reshaped itself. The kids moved between homes without fear. My son rebuilt his world carefully. My wife lived with consequences that couldn't be edited by silence. And I stopped confusing calm with happiness, quiet with love. People still asked what happened. I learned to answer simply, we couldn't keep living in a story that required lying. And when I think back to the night I heard that laugh behind a half-closed door, what surprises me isn't the betrayal. It's what followed. My son and I, sitting at the same table where everything broke, choosing honesty over avoidance, choosing not to pass the hurt forward. That was the ending no one expects. Not revenge, not reconciliation, just truth, and the decision to finally live inside it.